Well, how let's David? Some of you don't know why I'm here, but I've been invited by Mark to talk about my life. I published a book recently, on the 18th of September, called, or titled, Converted on LSD Trip. Or as my son says, was my dad really converted on an LSD trip? And an alternative title could be, or was manic depression the cause? Now I'm going to ask you guys to answer that question after you hear what I have to say. The reason for the title is that it's the headline news of the Bucks Herald newspaper, dated the 11th of February 1971. And that occurred because I appeared in court on the 9th of February 1971, answering charges of 24 crimes, 3 of which I was convicted for, the rest were taken into consideration, after I confessed to the police a year after that I became a Christian. And the magistrates that day, when sentencing, covertly said to me in the court that the crimes that I had committed, which was a 3-year period of undetected crime since leaving law school in 1968, were quite the worst case that they had ever had to deal with. And they felt that I was trying to be a martyr, because he said, your evident desire to be a martyr is one thing we're not going to gratify. And I was expecting to be sent to prison for at least 3 years. But they conditionally discharged me for 3 years, to my relief and celebration of all my friends. That I became a Christian after experiencing a bad trip on LSD. On the 16th of January 1970, I'd taken LSD and given my brother drugs that night, and I had this bad trip, and in my desperate state of mind and need, I called out to God, saying, Jesus, please help me. And he heard my cry. And as a result of that, I turned that night from crying to Christ. My brother was left untouched. He'd taken drugs that night. The story is also about my brother. Now, before I just mentioned that, I want to say, 25 years later, he ends up in prison in the Philippines, serving a 16-year prison sentence for a crime that he actually didn't commit. That's not to say he wasn't guilty of certain things. He was, but he wasn't guilty of the crime, but he was sentenced to prison for it. 5 years after that conviction, in the jail in the Philippines, he became a Christian too. 30 years after I became a Christian. He became a Christian through reading C.S. Lewis's book, Mere Christianity, and was convinced that Jesus was Christ, the Son of the living God.
The essence of what I wish to talk about is contained in my new book, Converted on LSD, Extended Edition. But it continues in The Beat and Strict and Particular Baptist, Concise Edition, Trojan Warriors, The Fall and Desperation and Recovery, Before the Cock Crows, and finally in Mission to the Philippines. And I'm sure if you find this part of the story interesting, it gets much better and more intriguing as we go. I'm going to outline just the first part of the story, which is contained in 9 chapters. The story starts in chapter 1. I meet Mrs. Knight.